So how do you use a indicator that might have some kind of an output signal when something occurs and to flatten a trade using a BloodHound signal? Yeah, so Dave has expanded upon his question. Yeah, so he has a news indicator. Yeah, so there are a few add-on indicators for NinjaTrader that look for news events and will generate some kind of an output from the indicator on the chart when there's a news event. So he wants to use that to block a signal. Okay, so flattening a signal versus blocking a signal is different. So we'll kind of cover both the flattening or exit signal and blocking a signal, kind of, yeah, as a generalized topic here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little utility indicator that comes with BloodHound, the time block indicator, to kind of as a proxy for Dave's news indicator that some of you guys might have here. So again, the question isn't about this time block indicator, but I am just using it so that way we have a visual kind of example to work with here on the chart. So all right, so what I've done is I've set up this time block indicator to give me an output or an indication between 10 a.m. right, 10 a.m. and 10:05. Something to kind of mimic what a news event indicator might do. So all right, so normally, yeah, so if you're working with some kind of a news event indicator, you will probably use that in the threshold indicator. I'm sorry, yeah, the threshold solver, right? In the threshold solver. So the threshold solver provides lots of different ways to look at or identify, some kind of a unique indicator and its output, right? So if you're working with a news event indicator, which I have not worked with one before, so there's no free one out there that I know of, but I would imagine that a news event indicator might give you different kinds of output values depending on what the news event is. So actually I probably should say, okay, yeah, I should probably use the equal, right? So if the time block indicator, which again, the time block indicator I'm using as a proxy for some kind of a news event indicator, right? So what I'm looking for is an output value of 1, right? And we can see on the chart that the time block will output a value of 1, or basically it outputs a true event. The way I set the time block up is we get a true output or a value of 1 between 10 a.m. and 10:05 on the chart on Thursdays. So once again, this output of 1 is just as a kind of proxy for a news event indicator. Right. So we have an output. In some cases, maybe your news event will output some kind of value that says you should only be looking for a long signal, or you should only be looking for a short signal. I don't know. Depends on how those news event indicators work. But the question is, so how do you flatten a position, based on your news event indicator? Or how do you block signals, right, based on that? Right. So with this, So with this kind of a proxy threshold solver, we'll kind of go over those blocking or exiting or flattening a position kind of as a generalized kind of rule of thumb here. So if we have an output from your indicator through the threshold solver, let's see here. Let's name this logic template. All right, so I've got some kind of a name in here for this logic template. So now we can kind of show how to use this. Right, so I have a news event kind of signal, and so maybe you want to use this news event signal to flatten a position, right? So we'll talk about that first. All right, so in our strategies, right? So obviously, if you're going to use a BloodHound exit signal, so if we're using this signal from your news event to flatten a position, right? That's what we call a exit signal, right? And so, of course, the only way you can use an exit signal is with a strategy, right? Because only NinjaTrader strategies can manage orders, right? So the only way a BloodHound exit signal can exit a position or manage an order, manipulate an order is through a strategy. So with Raven, right? So if you're using Raven, right, you have an exit logic template. So let's see here. Let's load in. So we have to load in today's workshop file, right? And so you would simply just take your news event indicator, create a logic template out of it, right? So it's separate from your entry signals. And then you would use that logic template for your exit logic. So whenever your news event indicator, gives you, some kind of an output, that says you should be closing your trades, then then you just put that into a logic template, that you'll be using as an exit signal, right? And again, to clarify what an exit signal is or how exit signals work, right? So what I generated is a long and a short output. So with a long and a short, this will flatten any position. Doesn't matter if it's a long or a short trade. It'll flatten both a long and a short trade, right? Now, if your news event, if your news indicator is really highly detailed, and it will give you, certain news events that say, well, you should only exit out of long trades. So if you're in a long trade today, you should only close that out. But if you have a short trade on, don't worry about it. Keep your short trade going. So if your news event is that detailed and that organized, then if you only want to exit your long trades, then you need your news event indicator to only output a short signal, right? So a short exit signal will close out a long trade. So in other words, your exit signals should be opposite of the trade direction. That's how exit signals work. So a short exit signal will close out or flatten a long trade, and a long exit signal will close out or flatten a short trade. Right, so if you want to be very specific with your news event indicator, right, then you'll have to make sure, that you are generating, a short signal to exit those long trades or a long exit signal to flatten the short trades. So that would be for exiting a trade. Now, as far as kind of using your news event indicator to block signals or filter signals, more directly, it'd be filtering signals. Then that is a little different here. So, all right, so this would be, all right, so this would be, for exiting a long and a short trade, as an example. So, let's see here. Let me make a copy of this guy, and we'll paste the copy down, and this will be for, let's see here. I have to think about this one for a little bit. Okay, so now I've got something, close to an approximation here. All right, so I've set up, right, this new threshold solver, and again, I'm using the time block indicator, and I manipulated the time block indicator, to do something that you wouldn't normally use the time block indicator for. But what I have, right, is I have a long output period, right, and then an empty period, and then a short output period, right? So hopefully this might be something that a news event indicator, might output for you, right? And so the key is, is figuring out how does your news event indicator work, so that way you can figure out how to get a long output, how to get a long output from that indicator when the news event is saying you should only be in long trades today, today, or setting up the indicator so that you can get a short output, where the news event is saying, you should only be taking short trades today. Right? So how you set that up is totally depends on the indicator, how the indicator was designed, right? And so that's the key, is figuring out how are you supposed to read that news event indicator, and then setting up the threshold solver properly so that when the news event says you should only be in long trades today versus the news event you should only be in short trades today, right? And then you just simply connect that in with an AND node, like that, and then you get your filtering. So, right? So it's really just that, it's that simple. Just connect your, right, so your news event, threshold solver, which is filtering your trade signals, that solver, again, generally speaking, usually goes into the last AND node of your system, right? The AND node that's right before the result node, that's where you connect your filtering solvers up there. So, right, and then now, so there we go. So we can see long signals only and short signals only. And again, this is for your entry, right? This is for your entry. So the one thing I did poorly. Let's see here. So one thing that's important here is that I mix and matched entry signals with exit signals, which you do not do, right? This logic template needs to have you need to separate your exit signals from your entry signals in separate logic templates. So what I should be doing is I should actually make a copy of this. There we go. So yeah, so the first example was for news event, flatten or exit signals, right? So I should completely get rid of that, and it should only be, the logic, and it'll probably be just one solver for the news event exit signals. It's probably, all you probably need is just one solver, right? So definitely no entry signal logic on this logic board. And then the other logic board, so if you're using your news event indicator for entry signal filtering, right, then that obviously should be on a separate logic template there. So just like that. So make sure you keep those separate. And so then, let's see here. All right, so let's go back into the strategy. So just to kind of round out and kind of complete this picture here. So for Raven, if you were using Raven, let's load in the workshop file again. Right. So for Raven, right, the entry signals, you would select your your entry signal logic template, and then again for your exit signals, it should be a totally separate logic template. So, right, because you have two different types of signals, so they need to be in separate logic templates. So, so it'd be like that. And it would be the same thing in Blackbird. Right? Remember, Blackbird has entry logic and Blackbird has exit logic. And so you'd set your logic templates up exactly the same way in Blackbird. Your entry signals go into your entry logic, and your news event exit signals go into the exit logic. Right? Just pretty straightforward.